Losing someone can really throw you for a loop, like you're
Yeah.
totally lost, no sense of direction. And that's what we're tackling in this deep dive, that feeling of being adrift. We're exploring the 15 tasks of grief from the decisionary workbook.
And it's not about like rushing through it, right?
Right.
It's about how you can sort of shape your journey through grief. The thing that really struck me about this whole approach is how much it emphasizes making decisions.
Mm.
It reminds you that even when everything's chaotic, you still have choices.
It is so empowering, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because you feel so powerless.
absolutely.
And this workbook uses this really sweet story about Jano. It was a little red-breasted bird,
Yeah.
and it uses that story to illustrate the tasks. It's not just like dry theory. It's about relatable experiences. So
Yeah.
imagine you're Jano, and you've experienced a loss. Your whole world's been turned upside down.
And you meet all these other birds, right? Each one kind of embodies a different way of dealing with grief. Like there's this one bird, Elinee. She makes her feathers all dull gray to hide her emotions.
Oh, wow.
And Jano, he's got this vibrant red and black plumage, right? He shows her that expressing those feelings, even if it's tears, can be so freeing.
It's like the workbook is saying, hey, it's okay to cry. It's okay to not have it all together. In fact, they say it's a really important step. They even have a task for it, right?
Yeah, task one, express.
Yeah.
It's all about giving yourself permission to just feel everything, no judgment.
And they talk about crying. They talk about writing, expressing yourself through art. Sometimes words just aren't enough.
Right.
And I love how they frame this whole crying freely idea. They're not saying it's weak or anything. They're saying this is important. What are your thoughts on that?
It's acknowledging that if you bottle things up, it can actually be more harmful, in the long run. It's like when you try to hold a beach ball underwater.
Uh-huh.
You can do it for so long, but it takes so much energy, and then eventually it's just going to pop up, and not always in a way you expect.
And that takes us to another powerful idea that they have, which is this concept of decisions, like making decisions to help you heal.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like big life choices, but just being mindful of those little things you do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Like deciding, okay, I'm feeling down, I'm going to call a friend instead of just being by myself.
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't really feel like it, but I'm going to put on my favorite song. These little things can make a difference. Think about a time you reached out to someone when you weren't feeling great. How'd that make you feel?
Oh, it's amazing how connecting, even in a small way, can just make you realize you're not alone.
Oh.
And that actually reminds me of another task. Task 2, love.
Yeah. And it's easy to think of love as this romantic thing, but this workbook, it expands on that beautifully. It's about letting other people support you.
Yeah.
Especially when you're feeling vulnerable.
Yeah. And they even talk about reaching out to people who've had a similar experience.
Hmm.
Have you ever noticed how sharing with someone who gets it, it just hits differently?
It's like this understanding you don't even need words for. It's powerful. Since we're on this topic of connection, there's this other task. It really resonated with me. Task 10, relocate.
Oh, that one stuck with me too. It's about figuring out where your loved one fits in your life, even though they're not physically there.
Right.
It's such a strange thing to wrap your head around.
It is, and I love how carefully the workbook handles it. It talks about this visualization exercise, the garden of memories.
Okay, I want to hear more about this garden of memories. It sounds pretty powerful.
So picture this. You create this peaceful place in your mind.
Okay.
It's this beautiful garden full of vibrant colors, calming sounds.
I like it.
And there's this special spot there, maybe a bench or a fountain, where you can actually meet your loved one in your mind.
Wow. So it's about holding on to those good memories, but not letting them, I don't know, overwhelm you, I guess.
Exactly.
Yep.
Especially early on when everything feels so raw. This relocating thing, it's not about forgetting them. It's just finding a way to honor them while still, living your life.
It all comes back to this idea of actively shaping how we grieve, instead of just letting our emotions just toss us around. And what reminds me of that?
What's that?
That idea of kintsugi,
Ah.
repairing something broken with gold. Such a cool metaphor, right?
It's beautiful.
For emotional wounds and stuff.
It really is like saying those imperfections, those cracks, they're part of you. They make you unique.
Yeah.
They show that you've been through tough times and come out stronger.
The workbook even suggests picturing yourself actually repairing those wounds with kintsugi.
I love that.
Like in task 8, heal.
It's like you're not hiding the pain, you're transforming it.
It's really making me see grief differently. It's not passive. You can actually participate in it, shape it.
Exactly. And there's this other task. It's all about taking charge like that.
Yeah.
Task 5, speak proactively.
Oh, yeah. This one talks about the power of what we tell ourselves
Yeah.
and what we say out loud,
Hmm.
because it's easy to get stuck in those negative thoughts, especially when you're grieving.
It happens for all of us.
The workbook wants us to be aware of that and choose better language, more hopeful language.
Like that saying, be kind to yourself. We need to hear that, especially when we're hurting.
Totally. We forget to do that.
We do. You know, one thing that really struck me in this task,
What's that?
they talk about creating a grief garden.
A grief garden. What's that?
It's a real place, you know,
Oh.
like a little planter or a spot in your yard. And you plant things and care for them and watch them grow.
So it's like a symbol for healing.
Exactly. You can even write your thoughts down or memories or even messages to your loved one. Bury them in the soil.
So letting go, I love that.
It really is. Healing takes time, and that's okay.
It really is.
Speaking of time, maybe we should move on to the last level of the 15 tasks. Transcend. This one, it really got to me. It's about finding a new purpose after loss.
That's such a big question, you know?
It is.
Finding meaning when you've experienced something like that.
Yeah. And the workbook starts this section with a Rumi quote. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Even when things are dark, there's still potential for growth.
It's hopeful when you're in the middle of grief. You need that hope.
Absolutely. And there's this task, it really resonated with me. Task 12, serve. It's about giving back, making a difference, even though you're hurting.
So it's like turning that pain outward in a good way, like doing something good to honor that person.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be this big, grand gesture either.
Right.
Even small things like volunteering somewhere or just being there for a friend who's struggling.
Like that ripple effect we talked about.
Exactly. Even the small things matter.
It does make you think, though. Helping others when you're grieving yourself, it seems almost, I don't know.
Backwards.
Yeah, a little bit, but I get it too. When you focus on someone else's needs, it can take you out of your own head, even for a little while.
Exactly. And it reminds you that you're still capable. You still have something to give, even when you feel lost.
It's like, okay, I can still do this. Even just listen, be there for someone.
Yeah.
That's enough.
That's enough. And, you know, speaking of finding that strength again, there's another task. It's all about getting back on solid ground. Task 13, believe. It's about rebuilding your belief system after a loss.
It makes sense, right? Grief can really shake things up.
It does. Like the ground beneath you just shifts. And you're left wondering what's real, what you can trust.
Exactly.
That's where task 13 comes in. It's like, okay, let's look at your beliefs, maybe question some things. Find something to hold on to bigger than yourself. Could be faith, spirituality, even just believing in people.
One thing I found helpful in this task was they talk about identifying your core values,
Yeah.
like what's important to you, and then finding ways to live by those values even more. Because everything else might feel uncertain, but those things, they're your anchor.
Exactly. They guide you. And the workbook's got some practical tips for this too, like finding mentors who really embody those values or making a values action plan. It's like putting it into action, right?
Love that. Values action plan. So it's not just words, it's what you do.
Exactly. And as we get closer to the end of this transcend level, it's hitting me. These tasks, they're not just about dealing with loss, they're about like really living again, finding joy, even with the sadness.
Learning to live alongside the grief, yeah. Not letting it take over.
Yeah. And that leads us to task 15, the last one, appreciate.
What's that about?
Taking stock, you know, looking at the good that came from going through all this, feeling grateful for what you've learned.
Grateful, even for grief.
Even for grief, it might sound weird, but it's powerful. The workbook suggests a gratitude journal. Write down things you're grateful for every day. Little things like a good cup of coffee or a pretty sunrise.
When you're hurting, those small things, they stand out.
They do. It's about shifting your focus, right, from what you lost to what you still have.
It's a good reminder.
It is.
Yeah.
And, you know, the workbook ends on this really interesting note. It says, you'll know you've worked through your grief when you feel like your pain isn't running the show anymore. And you start wanting to help others with their pain. What do you think about that?
It's powerful. Though I bet everyone takes something different from it. It's like grief changes you. It can make you more compassionate, more understanding.
Like he went through the fire and came out different, maybe a little stronger, definitely wiser. And now we get it, you know? You can be there for someone else who's hurting.
A beautiful way to honor the people we've lost. And a way to honor our own strength, too.
It is, isn't it? And that's something to remember. Grief is so personal, but you're not alone in it. Other people get it. They've been there. And just knowing that, that can make all the difference.
It really has been incredible exploring the 15 tasks of grief with you. Hopefully it's given our listeners some helpful things to think about. Just remember, there's no right way to grieve. Be kind to yourself, let yourself feel everything, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You don't have to do this alone.